Sling and Things.
Sup, and welcome to Slingin' Things. And it's good to be back in Digital Manhattan. The last two episodes definitely had more things in it than slings, but hey, I was interested in Death Stranding, and I hope you didn't mind the detour if you watched it. I know the premise of the series is odd enough without me completely deviating from it, but hey, Spider-Man did appear in the last episode for about 3 seconds, so by that metric, it was still a Slingin' Things episode, technically. Anyway, after digging into Death Stranding and all that came with it, I was in the mood to watch something dumb, something light and easy to process. Sometimes it's nice to watch a movie that doesn't require you to pay close attention to it the whole time. It doesn't mean you lower your standards or whatever, but sometimes you just want to sit back and watch something simple and not necessarily have to think about it that hard. You know, you don't turn off your brain, but you dim it a little bit, and you enjoy the thing you're watching for the sake of what it is. It's like comfort food. And to that end, the movie that I watched for this episode was something that I knew wasn't going to be amazing, but I figured it could still be enjoyable in a dumb, disposable kind of way. The film that I watched and will now review is 2020's Underwater, which stars Kristen Stewart of Twilight fame, and which was directed by William Eubank. Notably, this film is also the answer to a trivia question, because Underwater was the very last film ever released under the 20th Century Fox production moniker. After this movie, the company's name was changed to 20th Century Studios because of the Disney buyout of Fox. So, with that in mind, did the 20th Century Fox brand go out with a bang with Underwater? No. It had potential, though. The movie centers around a bunch of crew members at an underwater drill station, and there's an accident that happens that forces the workers there, including Stewart, to try to escape. And you'd think that that would be enough to sustain the movie, but no, because it quickly becomes apparent that the thing that caused the accident is something almost supernatural, that there's something out there, some kind of creature that's doing all this to them. So, the first major problem with this movie is that it has a focus issue. The moment the film begins and you see the facility start to flood, the movie wants your attention to be fixated on the mystery of what's out there and what could have done all this. Like, even the characters are saying things to each other like, "This shouldn't have been possible. What do you think is out there?" When the movie should have been concentrating on the fact that the facility was flooding and almost everyone there was dying. Underwater could have capitalized on its setting by making the first half of the movie a grounded, tense examination about a bunch of people trying to crawl their way to safety, kind of like the Poseidon adventure, and then introduced its monster, once we're all invested in the cast of characters. It should have began with the collapsing station being the primary villain. But instead, the movie wanders away from the inherent tension of them all being trapped underwater to make the conflict all about the mystery of whatever sea creature is out there. And as a result, you stop worrying about the elements, when that's like the greatest strength that this movie had going for it. Underwater also has commitment issues, in that it keeps trying to be a movie that it shouldn't be. T.J. Miller is in this film as a goofy comic relief character, and every time he speaks, he drains the life force from this movie, and his character just can't die fast enough. He and the others start cracking jokes and having these back and forths with each other that just seem totally out of place for the predicament that they're in. And at no point do you ever buy that this is how real people would behave if they were actually in this tense situation. In fact, you can't buy that any of them would be in the situation to begin with, since none of them look like they should even be there. They're all young, attractive nerds, and yet for some reason they're working blue-collar maintenance jobs at a drill site that's 7 miles underground. The movie does itself no favors either, because it keeps ripping off Alien, which, besides being one of the best sci-fi horror movies ever made, was also a 20th Century Fox picture, oddly enough. The plot of Underwater isn't a carbon copy of Alien, but there are like 12 specific sequences in Underwater that are straight out of Alien. And if you've seen Alien, you will recognize them the moment they pop on screen, because they're intentional. There's even a moment when they all go to the control room of the drill site, and the control room looks exactly like the bridge of the Nostromo in Alien. I don't doubt for a second that when the producers of Underwater pitched this to executives, they must have pitched this as Alien if Alien was underwater instead of in space. And sure, if you're gonna give homages or steal from the best. Alien is a great movie. But it's such a great movie that it makes Underwater look amateurish by trying to mimic it, since it fails in so many of the ways that Alien excelled. For instance, Alien did a phenomenal job of setting up its cast as ordinary people, as typical workers who knew each other and who had familiarity with each other, and whose presence on the ship was never in question. And so when those characters started getting picked off one by one, you felt it. You got the sense that a real person had actually met their end. In Underwater, though, these people have no chemistry with each other, and in fact, they seem to be constantly surprised whenever any of them knows anything about what to do. You would have no idea watching this movie that these people worked and lived with each other on a daily basis, at a highly specialized work site no less. Underwater was clearly written from the perspective of someone who doesn't actually know what it's like to work at a facility like this, and that's unfortunate given that so much of this movie's premise depends on you accepting these people as authentic, relatable characters. But they're not. When you see T.J. Miller's character, who walks around with a bunny rabbit and who talks about how much he likes anime, there's never an iota of a second that you buy that he is an asset in any way to this group. Never mind an iota where you like his character. Although I will concede that I'm probably biased and that I just don't like T.J. Miller to begin with, for several reasons. There are other issues. The dialogue is terrible. The acting is bad. And it's one of those things where you can't blame the actors for it because they didn't have a lot to work with here. In fact, I give Kristen Stewart a lot of credit because she really put forth an effort in this. And that's commendable because she easily could have phoned this in. The special effects, weirdly, aren't bad in Underwater, except that you can barely see them because a giant portion of this movie takes place at the bottom of the ocean where they're surrounded by dark water and where you can't make out what the hell is going on. There are multiple scenes in this movie where the crew gets attacked by sea creatures where it was so hard to see what was going on that I honestly lost track of who was alive and who wasn't. Like, characters resurface who I had already written off because I couldn't follow where they were on the screen anymore. And as for the monster, or monsters, there's such a build-up towards finding out what it is that's been attacking them that when you finally see what it is, it's totally unsatisfying because you can barely even see it. Underwater was not a cheap movie. It cost $65 million, which was pretty expensive for a 90-minute January sci-fi movie. And yet, all that money went into CGI effects that, if they're realistic, are so realistic that you can't tell what's happening half the time. And what's the point of a creature feature where when it's all said and done, you can't recall what the creature even looks like? I think the most notable thing about Underwater, if I remember this movie at all, is that there are like 3 scenes in this movie where Kristen Stewart is running around in her underwear, which is a feature that Underwater has in common with both Alien and Death Stranding, now that I think about it. And it reminded me of this tweet that I saw shortly before I watched this movie that's about the difference between how men are portrayed and how women are portrayed. And it's so true. Off the top of my head, I don't think I've seen a single action movie where the main male character is running around in ultra-revealing tighty-whities in a dramatic moment, like this. You don't see it, because it would be considered comedic. The audience wouldn't take it seriously. But you absolutely see it with characters that are women. And what's funny is, there might be a movie out there with fan service where, like, the opposite happens. A hunky guy takes his shirt off or whatever. But that's all it is. It doesn't need this complicated setup. Whereas in movies like Underwater, the screenwriter had to incorporate the fan service into the plot, which I've always found fascinating. Like, in Underwater, it couldn't just be that you see Kristen Stewart come out of the dressing room without any clothes on. Because, of course, that would be seen as gratuitous. So instead, they make it so that the mech suits that they wear were constructed in such a way so that you can't wear pants under them, and so the two leading women in the movie have to take their pants off, and it's kind of absurd that the person whose job it was to write this movie must have spent a considerable amount of time contemplating, okay, how can I get the women in this movie half naked in a way where I'll have plausible deniability? How can I make it seem like it's just a coincidence, it's an accident that Kristen Stewart doesn't have clothes on for the final act of this movie? Hollywood. Aside from that, Underwater is a very forgettable, disappointing movie. I was watching this in a receptive state too, and I still didn't enjoy this. The best I can say about Underwater is that it's short. It's an hour and a half long. But it doesn't feel short. Somehow this movie drags. So, unless this sounds like something you might watch with your friends so that you can poke fun at it, this is skippable. You do not need to see Underwater at all. It's not very exciting, it's not scary, and half the time, you can't even see what's going on. I will say this though. If you've never seen Alien, and if the concept of this movie sounds interesting to you, go and watch Alien, because it is a phenomenal movie and it holds up. Watch it in the dark, watch it late at night with the sound up. If you're into sci-fi horror movies, you'll love it, in all likeliness. And if you have seen Alien before, but you haven't seen it in a while, you're still better off watching Alien again than seeing this once. Which might sound harsh, but given that Underwater clearly wouldn't exist if not for Alien, it's only fair.